Hello, I'm Dr. James Webb with the University of Fairfax. Today we have a speaker for our monthly webinar, and our speaker for today is going to be Dr. Rick Livingood. Well, Dr. Livingood, I've known him personally for at least 8 years, and I'd say Dr. Livingood, he lives in Tucson, Arizona with his wife, Sue. They've been married for about 40 years, and they have 3 sons. And all their sons are married and out of the house. And so Dr. Livingood and Sue, they enjoy that empty nest. They have 6 grandchildren, and Dr. Livingood has learned to now they have 6 grandchildren. Now, a little bit about Dr. Livingood's technical skills. Dr. Livingood learned to program in high school in 1968. However, it was like 10 years after graduating with his bachelor's degree before he really entered the computer field. And he started off into broadcasting. And as the broadcasting years wound down, he got back into computers, and with his first job developing an information technology department for a local defense contractor. In 1996, he left his IT director's position and started his own consulting firm. He did computer consulting for over 14 years. Many of his customers were Fortune 500 companies and the U.S. Department of Defense. Also during that time, he began teaching graduate classes in computer science at local universities. He completed his PhD in 2003 from Capella University. He also holds several industry certifications, including CISP. He also completed advanced technology courses at Stanford University, a computer forensics program at Carnegie Mellon, and he's currently taking graduate courses at the University of California, Berkeley. He's been at Campbellsville for nearly a year. That's where he's currently working as a professor in the graduate program. He also has been named the lead faculty for the doctoral cybersecurity PhD program there. Dr. Livingood has several hobbies, and among his hobbies, he loves doing woodworking projects, cooking, and reading. Now, so without any further ado, I present to you Dr. Rick Livingood.
So for a couple of minutes here, let me just encourage you.
Dr. Livingood, let me just make one more announcement. As far as for everybody who's listening on, you're going to be, I'm sure you're going to have lots of questions that you're going to want to ask Dr. Livingood. I ask that if you would, please send your questions as they come to Twitter, hashtag cybersecuritylive. And what we'll do is at the end of Dr. Livingood's presentation, we'll then answer those questions. Again, I'm sorry, Dr. Livingood, please.
All right. So, one of the things that I want to just start with before I get into the presentation is to encourage you. You've heard a lot about my background, a doctorate, several, after I finished my PhD, several courses, currently taking courses at Berkeley. And I want to just encourage you in your pursuit of education. Now, just to kind of give you some feel, this was where computers started for me. This, for some of you may not have ever seen something like this. This is a slide rule. Prior to computers, this was how we computed. Prior to computers becoming pretty mainstream in the late 50s, early 60s, slide rules were used a lot for computing. And of course, the other is punch cards. This is how I learned. All my data was stored on punch cards. Punched cards. My goodness, that goes back 40, 50 years. So don't underestimate education. I've been doing this for 50 years, and the reason I'm still active in it is I go back to school. I've worked on some certifications, and I have several certificates on the wall back there that are from various schools where I've done some what I would call postgraduate work after I finished my doctorate. So education is a great thing. Now for the presentation, let me bring that up here. And we're going to, let me quickly get to the point where I can control it. Our agenda and introduction, we're going to discuss the security of websites a little bit. We're not going to get into real big details because we want to demonstrate two tools. I have some static data capture from some websites that I did. And then I'm actually going to do at least one live or two live sites to see what we find out. So after we've gone through the discussion and we've looked at some static data, we're going to look at some sites where we get real data. I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. Why secure websites? Ha, ha, ha. Well, of course, there are, in my estimation, three major reasons we have to secure websites that transfer data back and forth across the internet. First, and probably foremost, is weaknesses in the user community. I'll say this in a very kind way. Users are kind of clumsy and sometimes dumb, and they make mistakes. And in making mistakes, they open a window of opportunity for those who are attackers to infect their systems in their homes, compromise their accounts that are on their local computer. If it's done in an organization, worse, it may cause problems within a small, mid, or large organization where there's an open gap for someone to walk through and now compromise not only the website, but possibly the whole network. Also, a lack of robust security in general website software. Web browsers have never really been known for great security. Neither have various types of web server software, Apache and IIS and others that are out there, although the IIS and Apache server are two of the biggest pieces of software. The most of the websites in the world are run by those software packages. And then insecurity of general internet protocols, and we're going to kind of camp on that a little bit tonight. The general internet TCP/IP itself still has a certain amount of insecurity, and in fact, we moved to Internet Protocol version 6 in the last couple of years. It was supposed to solve some security issues, and it hadn't been out more than a couple months, and there were some problems found almost immediately. So the essentials of securing sites are pretty simple. So, well, not necessarily simple, but for our purposes tonight, we will call them simple. Selecting a good security mechanism or mechanisms for website activity and assuring that those mechanisms are strong enough to reduce incidents. Now we're going to talk about two tools tonight that are associated with some organizations that are involved in security on the internet. The first, OpenSSL. Now, OpenSSL is more than just this tool we'll look at later. It's a library of software that implements TLS SSL. So you have the internet, you have the TCP/IP Internet Engineering Task Force (IETF) RFCs, RFCs request for comment for transport layer security and secure sockets layer protocol. That's the overarching protocol. It's the protocols themselves are a part of what we use when we use TCP/IP implementations on a Mac, on a Windows machine, on a Linux box. The actual implementation of the libraries for implementing TLS SSL are most often provided by just a couple of organizations. And the one that maintains the tool that we're going to look at, one of the tools we're going to look at tonight, and the software that implements TLS SSL is the OpenSSL Software Foundation. Begun in 1998, it was actually what they call a fork. It was a deviation of work that was done by Young and Hudson. And it is now maintained by a nonprofit organization. It's an open license, so anyone can use it. It is used heavily on websites all over the world, particularly Apache. And it also is a general purpose cryptographic library that supports TLS and SSL. The library secures communications over the network. So it implements TLS SSL as OpenSSL, a series of libraries that can be added to software that a company might build. And it implements the security over the internet and over networks. So if you have a very large organization with a very large network, you may run TLS SSL using OpenSSL to secure the traffic on your networks. I worked for a small bank for a while. It was a credit union here in Tucson. And they had a couple of, well, more than a couple of branches. They had about 24 branches in different places throughout southern Arizona. And we implemented OpenSSL for the security of the transport of information from branches back to the main core server, because it was using a fiber network that we weren't responsible for. It was the provider was a local company, and so we had to make sure that the traffic flowing from the branches back to the corporate office and then back to the branches was secure, and that was the way it was done. And of course, obviously used with the internet, and it protects against eavesdropping. It also helps with the identifying parties that are on both ends of a conversation. And we talked about this already, widely used on a lot of web servers in many locations throughout the world. It implements basic cryptographic functions, and of course encrypts the traffic between the parties. To implement the OpenSSL functionality, OpenSSL uses wrappers so that they can implement the TLS SSL support, the security, on a multitude of different systems, which I was thinking when I was looking at some of these things over the past few weeks, wow, what a job that must be to make sure you support all the browsers and all the versions of the browsers and all the different software out there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, as is typical, it doesn't surprise me that OpenSSL and some other implementations that support TLS SSL have had some vulnerabilities that have been identified in the past. In fact, at one point, OpenSSL's certificate with NIST was pulled temporarily, NIST being the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It was pulled, and the reason it was pulled was because of some vulnerabilities that were found. And those things were corrected, but of course that takes a little bit of time. TLS is, so we'll talk a little bit about the overarching protocol, protocols implemented within TCP/IP. TLS is a successor to SSL. SSL's been deprecated recently. The most recent standard for security using TLS was implemented by the Internet Engineering Task Force's RFC 5246 and 6176, and all in the last 2 years or so, maybe 3 years. TLS is a symmetric security transport mechanism. That means there's a shared key that both the host system will call the server, and the client, the user's web browser, communicate using the secret key. So it's not implementing, as far as I can tell, and I'm pretty sure this is the case, it's not implemented as PKI. Although PKI is sometimes used in various implementations of security, there is a unique secret key. It's shared on both sides, but a secret key has to be sent from the server to the client, and so they use a process at the time of the connection called TLS handshake. That creates a temporary secure connection in which the secret key is sent from the server to the client. Now the two can talk to each other with a reasonable amount of security expectations. The latest version of TLS is 1.3 and was implemented just a few months ago, about 2 months ago. So TLS at 1.3 is actually pretty current. Now, SSL is a tool that is available. We're going to skip away from OpenSSL for a moment, then come back to it. So SSL is a tool. I'm going to share two tools tonight from Qualys, and I've got the web-based URL there that is available for free, and you can use the tool. And this is the one we'll look at live a little bit later, to analyze a website. When I say website, I mean it's analyzing the server. So the tool attempts to read using port 443 information regarding the security implementation of a website. Among the information that's available, a summary, key and certificate information, the protocols in use, and some handshake simulations. Now, it's nice to talk about it, but let's look at some of it. Now, some of what you're going to see may be really small. Some of it, I tried to make it as big as I could. That's why, let me go back a slide. That's why the URL, because you can actually go out, type in SSL Labs. It'll take you to the site, and then you could try these yourself. But a nice little summary gives a rating based on the current level of security expectation that organizations would expect. This was a grade A, and notice the certificate strength, but a couple of things a little less than what you'd like to see, but that might be pretty normal, to be quite frank with you. I'm not sure you'd ever find a perfect ranking for or rating for a website. Now, what we're looking at the moment, and I'm hoping it's not too small, but again, you can look at these things yourself, but it's broken down. The reports you get back, which we're going to see a little bit later, is broken down by different types of information. So the very first part of a return, basically, you'll see this in the live presentation in a couple of minutes. You put in a URL, and when you hit the submit button, it's going to go contact the server and start probing it for information. And this is the kind of thing that's normally available. Now think about this for a minute. If I can see it and you can see it, the bad guy can see it too. So this is some information that obviously someone who's trying to break into a website would be using to at least get some feel for what kind of security level the organization has. And, as we look at this, we're going to say to ourselves, is this strong enough? So at the very top, a little bit of information about the server key and the certificate. A couple of things of interest here. Notice the issuer. So DigiCert, they are using SHA-256 with RSA encryption. The certificate information, revocation information, there looks like they might have had one revoked. It's possible it was just a revocation and wanted to get a new certificate. But according to the report, the certificate status is currently good, not revoked. Now, to give you some background, if you don't understand it, a certificate is a way to provide a key that can be used to encrypt data during sessions or whenever it's needed. If it's compromised or the date of issue, the revocation date exceeds being renewed, then they revoke the certificate. You got to be able to say, hey, this isn't a good certificate anymore. There's a chance here that this might have been compromised. And in the case of any organization with security of any kind, you better have a good certificate. Again, notice it's a DigiCert SHA-2 version 2. It's running a key that is, and you can see it toward the bottom of the screen. The key is 2048 bits. We're going to talk a little bit more about this a little bit later. Next information, a set of information here, has to do with the configurations that are running or not running on the server. Now, of interest, we talked about the fact that TLS has kind of taken over for SSL. SSL has been deprecated. Notice it's not running any SSL versions. And this site is not running the latest, which is 2 months old. And there are obviously reasons called budgetary and other reasons that it might not be in place yet. They're running 1.2 and they will support 1.1 and they'll support 1.0. I would suspect that this particular website would be probably supporting 1.3 by the end of the year or the first part of next year. Different cipher suites available so that it can support different types of different types of clients that are reaching out for connectivity to the server. Notice the different levels, so SHA-256, some older ones, some weak ones that they'll support. Not necessarily, obviously you want to try to avoid that when you can, but again, clients, somebody who's coming to your website may have different types of equipment, and so you try your best to provide security while supporting as many web browsers as you can. Notice this is kind of interesting. It will send back what systems it will support. Now, again, if you're an attacker, you're going, ooh, Android, ooh, okay, they support IE8. I'm not a hacker, so I obviously don't get into that kind of thing. But and by the way, it continues. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. This screen is not complete. I only took the first however many. I did not grab all of the handshake simulations that this server will support. So it's interesting. It's supporting various levels of TLS for different systems. So older Androids 1.1, whereas the later Androids 1.2, and that kind of thing. So you know what it'll support, what the server will support in the way of web browsers. Protocol details. What is it? What are the things that it actually supports at a little deeper level than we've seen before? It's going to give you information that's quite helpful as to the level of support and also older protocols that should be in existence, whether they're still supported or not. You can see there's a number of functional activities at the protocol level that are not supported anymore, or things they have fixed, a vulnerability that they have fixed, and you can see a couple of those on there too, such as a Heartbleed and Ticket Bleed and a couple of others there that are on the list. And then it provides a kind of an overview HTTP request. So the request itself has some information come back. Notice here it is so the server itself. And we were talking about the protocols now. We're talking about the server itself. Now, this is a dead giveaway. I was using the Dell website. So I didn't say what it was earlier, but now I'll tell you. It was a Dell system running IIS 8.5. Notice the cookie information that it's setting. So it's setting cookie information, and that information is at the bottom. Now, let's take a look at, and by the way, it does come back with a little bit of information about how long it took to do the test, etc. Okay. Oh, and the HTTP status code 200 indicating that the request made was satisfied. So that's just so you have some idea if you wanted to know. Now, SSL, you can download the open. Hang on a second here. Now, oh, okay. Well, all right. So I had a little something I was doing yesterday, and it kind of looks like it made a little mistake here. There is a tool called OpenSSL. Let me see if it's here. Oh, it's not. Okay. Oh, this is the OpenSSL. Okay. There was something goofy going on yesterday with the PowerPoint. I never could quite figure it out. Now I know it's kind of hard to see. This is a tool called OpenSSL. Now, this is not a web-based tool. You download a little piece of software that you can run, and it is a terminal-based, or at least the piece I used is a terminal-based or command line-based tool, and it will also make a connection. Some of the information that we are getting back is similar to what we saw before, but it gets a little deeper here. Now, on the left side of the screen, I captured a server that is actually online to show bad protocol setup. It's not a functional website. It's a functional website, but it's not a functional organization. It used to be, but it's now shut down. So the site still sits there as an example of some bad protocol. On the right-hand side is the connection made to Chase Bank. I use Chase Bank, so I was kind of interested to know what was going on here. So if you go down toward the bottom and you compare both sides, you can see a line that says server public key, and on the site that is designed to be not so secure, they're using 1024-bit as the key length, and Chase is using 2048-bit key length. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a couple of minutes with some questions. What is a good key length? But notice the difference, and notice the difference in the size. The screen on the left is just a little bit bigger, but notice the dramatic difference in the actual certificate between a 1024-bit key and a 2048-bit key. One is we'll call it a bogus site, and the other is an active, everyday, millions of users site called Chase Bank. Using TLS1, SSL3, so they're still supporting the old 3, even though that is something that you will eventually see go away. Let's see. I'm not sure I'm going to try the OpenSSL, but I may. Now, what I'm going to do now is I want to do a live, just want to make sure. This is really weird. I did something, like I said, I did something yesterday, and it just moved slides around. It's kind of strange, and I thought I knew what had happened, and yet here I am in the middle of the presentation. It didn't come out quite the way I thought, but it's okay. So let's deviate away from a presentation, and let's do something real here. Let's talk. Yeah, I've got to get there we go. Let me come back over here for a second and get my stop sharing. Okay. Let me get up my screen that has SSL on it. What you're seeing is the actual tool. Notice toward the bottom, I thought this was interesting. The right column, recent scans that were done of the worst security. So if you want to look at what's bad, it worries me that one of them was visa.com, but I'm assuming that may, I don't think it's Visa, but who knows. A couple of them are overseas. Some of them kind of look a little worrisome. But bigaircloud.com, it's a cloud site, and it was one of the worst. Ooh, that worries me a little bit. Well, we won't go into all that. But what is on the screen under host name or next to host name is a bank in Malaysia. Now, if you go out and you look up Bank of Malaysia, you'll get some links to banks in the country of Malaysia in Southeast Asia. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you what is going on in foreign websites, not just in sites within the United States. So I'm going to click submit, and let's see what happens? As soon as it'll go here. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sharing this. Never mind. Here we go. All right. So, and as you might expect, a little scary, a foreign website gets an overall rating of an F. Would you want to put your money in the Bank of Malaysia? Not so sure. And then it has a listing of a lot of the issues that gave it an F. You'll notice it's using some insecure protocols. It supports a 512-bit suite. Ooh, it's vulnerable to a poodle attack. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, I would not want to be doing business with the bank. I better be careful what I say, but let me put it this way. Would you want to be doing business with the Bank of Malaysia? You'd have to think about that. Now let's go down a little ways and notice that what we're looking at now, we have a notification of the key size, 2048-bit. Now the key itself is good. That's not bad. But there's other things going on, probably the actual implementations of TLS, SSL, that, and most organizations, as you saw with Dell, they don't use SSL anymore. The only reason that Chase may have been using it is some of the older browsers that their clients have, customers like myself, but mine's up to date, but other customers that don't have savvy, like you and I do, might be using something with a little less support for TLS. It's still using SSL. So the key's okay. Key's not bad. We could live with the key at 2048. We'll talk about that later. Using SHA-384, 384, that's not bad. What else is it telling us here? Now notice the difference. Notice the difference between this website and the Dell website when it comes to protocol configuration. Whoa! Instead of having 12 or 14, they're only, look at that, they're supporting SSL2, SSL3, and TLS 10 and nothing more. Now, this is one of the reasons it got an F for its rating. Cipher suites, really, oh, good heavens. A 40-bit hash, little worried about that. Again, I'm not trying to pick on this bank. It's not the Bank of Malaysia. It's actually another bank within Malaysia. So I don't think we're going to get any trouble for this, but comments we're making. But I mean, hey, I don't have to say a word. I just look at all this and go, whoa, there's a bunch of red there and a bunch of insecures. They support all kinds of handshake simulation. That's okay. Let's see. Poodle attack. RC4 insecurity. They got a couple of issues going on there. Let's see. And an OpenSSL vulnerability that may not have been patched in the past. That may be the issues there. Not too bad. Some things they've plugged, but that's old stuff that probably is no big deal. Now let's see. This is running an Apache server. So Dell was running IIS, which is no surprise there. But this is running an Apache server, and my guess is this probably was not has not been patched recently, is my guess. Now, just for interest's sake, let's take a look at another site. So this time I'm going to try, and this one is always one that's available and never a problem, Boeing.com. Three different servers. So let's take a look at one of them. We'll just randomly pick one. 2048-bit, SHA-256. It has a server. Now, by the way, I did not notice, I didn't check to see on the other one, on the bank in Malaysia, what the cert was, but this is a cert, a DigiCert. that has been, let me try to catch this here and see if it'll not move on me. I think it's still, oh, it's still processing. That's why. So you can see at the top, it says it's 86% complete. I try to move it down and it's bouncing on me because the web browser page is bouncing on me because it's not quite done. Let me see if it'll go down this way. No, it's okay. There we go. So it's still, all right, there we go. Now we can see a bit more. Well, it keeps bouncing back because it's not 100% complete on its download. So I don't know how long it'll hold here. Again, 2048 bytes of key. Looks pretty good. It's still bouncing. All right, now it's almost done. It does take a little time for the completion. There we go. A B rating. Ooh. Now let's not go into that. We're not going to do that here. Not when we just saw an F. Okay. Forward security. There may be reasons that some people still allow some activity that might have known issues. And it's probably that one issue that downgraded the site. Again, we said DigiCert 2048-bit. The certificate is good. Let's see. Protocols, they have shut everything down but TLS 1.2. So no SSL. They haven't upgraded to 1.3. Again, that may be a cost factor. Cipher sets, cipher suites, quite a few. They look good. None of those 40-bit ones like we saw from the other example we used. A bunch of different systems, platforms that it will support. I'm sorry, browsers it will support and platforms it will support. And then no known real, now heartbeat extension still active, and I'm not quite sure what that, oh, I'm sorry, that's heartbeat. That's not heartbleed. I'm sorry. Here again, it doesn't look like there's anything that's a problem. Notice that the Poodle SSL version 3, of course, no, because SSL is not supported, as we saw back up here. So they only support TLS 1.2, no SSL anymore. This is a good example of deprecation in where companies have gotten away from the stuff that could have gotten them in trouble. This is running Apache. Nothing unusual really, other than the B rating, and so there you go. Now SSL is a little bit more complicated. I won't try to do that one. You download it, it loads into your system, and then once that's done, either at command line. For me, I use Apple's, as you can see, and I used a terminal. I just opened a terminal window and did OpenSSL from there. Now, any questions? Dr. Webb.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Livingood. That was outstanding. Yeah, we have a few questions that have come in so far, and let's see. The first question is, what is a valid key length?
Just in Tampa, Florida, at a ISC Squared. If any of you are familiar with security certifications, ISC Squared is probably the premier certifier in the security field. CISSP, most of you are familiar with that. There's a couple of other certifications. There's a cloud one. There's a bunch of others. There's one in secure software. I was in Tampa to help write exam questions for the CSSLP exams, Certified Secure Software Lifecycle Professional exam. We were talking about this. So currently, the recommended secure key length is 4096. Now, you say, wait a minute. The sites we all saw tonight were 2048. Does that mean they're not secure? The answer is no, it doesn't mean they're not secure. What it does mean is they are going to be making changes shortly, like in the next year maybe, where they're going to be moving to 4096 key length for the certificate. Now, I'll give you an example. It has to. There's a couple of reasons why it's a slow go. Why don't we just move to 4096? Well, a couple of reasons. One is hardware. So when you add more bits to the key length, what do you think is going to happen every time somebody logs in? Well, it's going to take longer to authenticate them because the key's longer. So companies are going to be a little reticent to shell out more money when they've already shelled it out recently. They're going to be careful about shelling more out. And so there's always this friction between what we need and what we can actually afford to do. Now, 2048 is not bad. And some companies haven't moved to 4096 because of hardware issues. It also has to do with clients logging in. You'll notice that the only bad one we saw at 1024 key length was a bogus one that's used for people to test, to use and get used to SSL and OpenSSL tools. So Chase had a 2048, Boeing had a 2048, Dell had a 2048. Interestingly enough, when I was playing around, I checked to see what the key length was from the bank I used to work for, the credit union here in Tucson, and they are using 4096-bit key now. It's going to, probably in the next 2 to 3 years, everybody's going to have to move to 4096, because what happens is as machines get faster and as the bad guys continue to do all their research that they do, they are going to find a way to quickly break a cipher that was based on a 2048-bit key, which means you got to make the key longer. And so at some point that will happen. But again, right now, software-wise, hardware probably being the big thing. And we discussed this the other day, a bunch of us. What was the biggest reason? And we all agreed it was hardware primarily. Getting faster machines so that when a key exchange takes place, that 4096-bit key doesn't slow things down to a point where it starts to impact operations. So 2048 is pretty acceptable, but 4096 is what most people will tell you needs to be moved to in the next year or two.
Okay, that was very good. So I guess it also, you just explained as far as what top-notch security environment, what the key links would be for a top-notch security. So that's interesting. Hey, another question that came in is, what is the future for website security protocols?
That's a complicated answer. But I'll give you the upshot. And that is, so I did some recent research for a paper, and one of the things being talked about is the fact that TCP/IP itself needs to change. Now, we just went through a major change in TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol. The set of the standard set, the standard protocol for doing anything on the internet. TCP/IP is implemented in Windows, Mac OS. It's implemented in all kinds of devices. It's implemented in Linux and Unix, etc. We just went through a transition from TCP/IP version 4 to TCP/IP or IP version 4 to IP version 6. Now, the main reason that we went through that transition was the IP4 address space. We run out of addresses. In fact, interestingly enough, there was a point in time about 10 years ago where University of California, Berkeley had more public address space available to them. In other words, they were assigned a block of addresses. They had more addresses assigned to them than the whole country of China. Well, obviously, all the foreign countries are going, we got to do something, we got to do something. And IP version 6 was the answer. The old address space, IP version 6 was 32 bits long. It's now 128 bits long. If I'm not mistaken, my numbers aren't too far off. that makes up a 128-bit IP address will equate to 32,000 IP addresses per square meter of the face of the earth. Think about that for a minute. That's a little mind-boggling. Well, in the process of doing the IP version 6, they also dealt with some security issues. Problem was, it didn't solve the problem as they'd hoped it would. There were some people out there finding holes in it almost immediately. So there's been some talk that the next generation of security protocols or the pieces of security protocol that need to be in whatever the master networking protocol is called has to change. And that means a major overhaul of TCP/IP. There's two problems with that. One, it takes a long time for that to happen. The Internet Engineering Task Force has to take time to generate. They'll do RFCs, requests for comment. They get comments in from experts all over the world, and then the IETF working group committee has to come together to decide how to weed these out, which are the really good ones and which ones do we not want to use. That takes time, could take a couple of years. Second thing is, it was extremely costly to move from IP version 6 to IP version 4 to IP version 6. In some cases, it required equipment to be replaced. Now, in some cases, if you had a relatively new piece of equipment, we'll talk about what those are in just a second, all it required was a software upgrade. But some systems, the hardware itself couldn't support IP version 6. So we're talking routers, switches, firewalls, that kind of thing. Now, if you're unfamiliar with networking, let me give you a reason why you just can't flip out money to upgrade your system. So a good router, particularly a border router, the router between the internet and your company can cost 50 grand at a minimum. A good size switch can cost 100,000 minimum. And some switches run between $250,000 and $500,000, depending on what they do. Firewalls, it depends on how many transactions are running through from the internet through your firewall into your system, but they can run 50 grand too. An upgrade of a system to support a brand new TCP/IP protocol and all the suites that are a part of that, including all the security, could cost a company somewhere between, I'd say, between $10 and $50 million. So it's not something you take lightly. So the future is that in the next 5 to 10 years, you may see another change, a new version of IP, or if it's even called that, because some people are saying, some researchers saying we aren't even going to call it TCP/IP anymore. It's going to be something totally different. And this may be driven by pure quantum computing, which we will not get into today. Hope that answers the question.
It does. Very, very good. And again, to the audience, remember, if you want to send a question to Dr. Livingood, it's hashtag cybersecurity live. Okay. I got another question that came in, and they're asking, this student's asking, what is IP next gen?
Well, Jim, I have coined IP. I used, well, okay, let me step back for a second. IP next gen was the term used originally when the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, started their work on IP6. So IP version 4, full bore, everybody's using it. Oh my goodness, we're running out of address space. By the way, they knew they were running out of address space before the turn of the century. They could see it coming. So what they ended up having to do was come up with a new plan. Well, originally they didn't know what to call it. So they called it IP Next Gen. And that became IP version 6. Now, I coined the term, I was writing a paper and I called it IP New Gen or something like that. I can't remember. And I mean, there is going to be another new generation of protocol. I don't know what they're going to call it. But IP Next Gen was the original name used when they in the early days of discussions of IP version 6, and then it quickly moved to IPv6, and that was it. I remember those days.
Yeah.
I was working with the Army. Oh my gosh, it was throwing everybody into a tizzy because it was going to cost a lot of money. They thought it was going to cost a lot of money to change. Turns out that what the major issue was, it was the IP version 6 addressing on the internet that needed to be really upgraded. Many organizations internally still use IP version 4. But what happens is the IP version 4 address that's used by a client machine inside the network, as it goes out through the internet, gets translated into an IP6 address that the company owns. And then when it comes back, it gets converted back into an IP4 address to get to the client machine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It was controversial, to say the least.
Now, and as I'm checking, that was the last question that I had to come in. So are there at this time any closing words you have for our audience, Dr. Livingood?
Well, it's never going to go away. Security's here to stay. From the very first real documented security incident, which took place in the 1980s at the University of California, Berkeley. Long story, but if you want to look it up, The Cuckoo's Egg, that was the name of the book that was written about that attack. Since that day, security's been an issue. Well, actually, prior to that, you locked them up in a safe. You didn't worry about it because there was no internet. But now it's all changed. And because of that, I don't think that security is ever going to go away. Now, they talk about AI and security, artificial intelligence, but I got news for you. Some of you will be in shock, maybe. I started working with AI in 1992 at a defense contractor's facility. I was working with a guy who was developing code. And the only reason it did not take off was because at that point in time, their machine could not process fast enough, nor was there enough memory to do good AI. But AI's been around for a long time. 24 or 5 or 6 years, whatever it is. So AI may help with it, but as someone just wrote this last week, where are the ethical considerations within the software of an artificial intelligence system? There are still questions about just what needs to happen with inside AI. Now, with all that said, I don't see security going away. It's a great field to be in. It's going to be around for a long time. I would recommend that if you're going to kind of plant yourself in the security field, you do need to understand a little bit about programming. Learn to program code, Python or C or C++ or C# or whatever, because implementing security is a programming issue, and you got to know how to deal with it. So you're going to have to learn a little bit about programming to be a good security professional. And just study. You constantly study. You're constantly talking to people. You're constantly listening to conversations from professionals. Interestingly enough, about 2 or 3 years ago, it was more difficult. It was very difficult to track a criminal. I can tell you, I can't tell you how I can tell you this, but I can tell you this. It's getting easier to track the criminals. I know it for a fact. Can't tell you how I know it, but I know it for a fact. And recently they just arrested 70 Nigerian scammers. And the reason was they were tracking them.
Oh, wow.
Long story. I can't tell you all the details, but very interesting.
Okay.
Parting shots.
Again, Dr. Livingood, we really do appreciate you spending this last hour with us and sharing this information. Has been very valuable. Even myself, I personally have gained a lot and I still got a whole list of questions I want to talk with you about.
I'm going to be on the road for a couple of weeks. Forget it. Don't call me. Don't call me.
Okay. Now, and to our audience again, tonight, this has been Dr. Rick Livingood sharing with us and analyzing websites for secure communications. So again, everybody, thank you for joining us. And this is the end of our webinar. Thank you.
Everybody have a great evening.